Thanks for joining us. My name is Nick F. Stratus, and as Jim said, I'm one of the partners at University of Utah Ventures. We're known as Epic Ventures, and we manage funds on behalf of the university as well as Science Bank. So when we're investing, we're bringing capital in from a number of different entities. But all you need to do is think about the fact that we've got a couple $100 million to deploy, and we want to deploy as much of that as we can here across the university ecosystem and build this economy. If you've heard of us at all, you may have heard of companies like Ancestry.com or Instructure, and we were the first money in those deals. So big outcomes for the state here. You've probably also heard of Recursion Pharmaceuticals, and we were part of the, I can't remember if it was the C2 or
like early, very early.
Very early. Ron was part of Recursion, so we'll talk a little bit about that story as well. And our goal is to build many more multi-billion-dollar outcomes that change the world for good and hopefully make the university and our investors a lot of money along the way. So let me start by having each of these individuals introduce themselves and just give a little background. Some of you may already know Alana and Ron, but that's how you say your name, correct, Alana? Great. Could you give them just a little introduction on your background in case people don't know you?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Alana Weld. I'm chair of HCI and also senior director of basic science here at HCI. My lab works on breast cancer metastasis. And I don't really consider myself an entrepreneur. I'm maybe doing some innovation, and really, like Jim said, as far as kind of like what Brad said, is why would I want to do that? And really what it is for me is wanting to do the best science I can and seeing gaps in the field that need to be filled, just like we all do as scientists or as physicians, scientists. We need to fill those gaps. And so in so doing, over the number of years, what I did is build a lot of patient-derived models that we needed for our research, and those turned out to be something that a lot of people need. And one of the best things that I did was just freely share them amongst the academic community. They become very well known, and then now the pharmaceutical companies want access to them. So in my case, what we're doing is more tangible property, and we can talk about that more if you want.
Great. Ron?
Yeah. Hey everyone, nice to meet you all. Ron Alpha. Let's see, physician scientist by training, actually did not practice, but it was always very passionate about translational medicine, making an impact for patients. And so ended up joining very early Recursion Pharma, which I moved out here back in 2016. So joined around seed stage. We were about a dozen people over here at Research Park. Spent 6 years there. Recursion's a company I was really focused on. Really one of the early companies in the space of using AI machine learning to build out a therapeutics drug discovery company. So spent 6 years there, was involved in the company essentially from seed stage all the way through IPO. And then I think we were about 400 people, and then ended up leaving Recursion back in 2022 to found another company focused entirely on oncology. So founded Noetic almost 3 years ago. We were able to bring in seed funding from Epic Ventures, amongst some others, and we're now Series A stage, so we've raised close to about 60 million. And really the focus of Noetic is really on the clinical problem. So how do we build foundation models of cancer biology that can help us understand which drugs will work in which patients? So we're very much focused on bringing in biospecimens and generating rich multimodal data and training models.
So let's go back maybe to the beginning of your educational and research pursuits for both of you, and talk to us a little bit about when commercialization started to maybe cross your minds and thinking about, in your case, Ron, entrepreneurship, in your case, Alana, working with industry. Were you exposed to that very early on and already thinking about it, or is that something that you had to be educated on yourself?
Yeah, I still need education. No, this is not something that I thought about at all in the beginning. It really was because people started to approach me to get access to our models and use them. And I will say that the pivot has been an incredible help in helping us, move that forward. There's just so much that I didn't know and I still don't know. But I think that what inspires me to do this, because I'll be honest, I was much like Brad, like, why would I want to do this? I don't need a fourth job. But actually, I think thinking about it in a way of, helping the university, helping patients by making these models available for research worldwide through companies that can actually do things that get to trials and get to patients more faster. And then thinking about if we help the university and we diversify our funding, that helps all of us. So for me, that's really the motivation more than being an entrepreneur or wanting to commercialize something. It's much more complex.
And before Ron jumps in, just to add on to that, that's a great path, right? And not everybody needs to be an entrepreneur. When Jim put up that path to, I can't remember what the title was of your slide, but it was something, the path to innovation. I don't know if you guys noticed, but it was idea and disclosure, and it looked like the path was you've hit the peak right when you get to market. When you get to market is when it really starts. So it's a challenging path, and I bring that up because entrepreneurship is not for everyone. I'll let Ron speak to his path a little bit and kind of the journey he's been on with Recursion and now with Notic, and these things don't happen overnight. So maybe a little.
Yeah, it's definitely not all fun and games or any fun games. Let's see, for me, so my journey kind of started during PhD, and so one of the things that you start to realize is, being someone who's very interested in like translation, I knew nothing about how drugs were made whatsoever. So in the midst of my PhD, and there was sort of this whole world and industry that was very foreign to me. So I ended up taking a summer off of research and doing kind of this 3-week program at the business school. So this was over at Stanford, and what was sort of motivating over there is you just have this whole startup ecosystem like going on around you. So basically, I spent 3 weeks in this like very abbreviated summer course, and then part of the course was we got together with teams and then worked on kind of startup ideas. That was actually where I met Chris, the founder of Recursion, and we sort of worked on an early version of the company. And for me, that was just really fun. I just really enjoyed that process of like taking the science and figuring out how we were going to build a company around it. And it sort of felt like there were a lot of other pieces. You're thinking about the science, but there were a lot of other pieces that you have to consider. And I just really enjoyed that process. So that kind of threw a little bit of a wrench in my career path, as it were, because I was headed down a very long journey of being a physician scientist. And so went back, finished my PhD, finished my MD, clinical rotations, and then I just couldn't get the bug out of my head. So I ended up calling Chris. I did all my interviews for fellowship, for residency, and then called Chris and decided to join Recursion.
And the Recursion path from when we invested until the IPO was about 7 years, I think.
Yeah.
7 or 8.
Yeah, 7.
What was the total duration from the time you guys met until that IPO? Was that?
So that was in 2013. So we met in 2013, and this was over the summer, and then we kind of worked on the idea. And Chris called me. He came back. He called me and said, "I'm going to start the company." So we founded the company close to the end of 2013. I think he initially started on SBIR grants, and then you guys came in and sort of initial investment. And then we hadn't. So then I got there in 2016. So probably about 2.5 years later, around May, and really the company existed for 2 years with about $1 million roughly funded, and hadn't raised a substantial amount of capital yet. And so at the end of 2016, we raised the initial Series A, which is about $15 million. So it's really, it was really, when I got there, it was, just a few of us in an office really trying to figure things out and not spending very much money. Like my first paycheck was not impressive.
So what would you both share about some of the early lessons you've learned as you've started to work partnering with industry and commercializing some of your research?
Yeah, I think one of the lessons I learned is, well, maybe I had misconceptions that I can correct. Maybe others have similar misconceptions. One is that you have to really invent something cool to commercialize it, and I think that's not exactly the case. In my case, tangible property, we don't even have patent on the models, the materials. I mean, it's really just something that we build, and it could be any kind of research tool, right? It could be an antibody, or in our case, models, it could be mice, whatever, and they don't necessarily have to be patented to be valuable. So just because you have published it, it doesn't mean that people don't still want to license it. So that's one thing. And then I think the other thing is working with pharma. I've had some sponsored research to my lab. Sometimes it's because companies want to use our models and they don't have the expertise, so they ask us to do an experiment for them. That became unwieldy very quickly, but now I can refer them to the precision cancer models shared resource that can do that, and they can basically get sponsored research that way, which is great. Working with companies actually has been really nice. I find that they're very, usually their science is really solid because there's a lot on the line for them. So in some ways it's easier than collaborations with academic scientists. So I think there's a lot of ways to do that, but really the other thing I would share is that for me it feels like I'm having a bigger impact with my research because now more people can use these models, which I still believe are the best models we have for breast cancer. And I can only do so much, so why not just get it out there and let other people do more?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe I'll add from the company side, we really, we're a small company, we're not even a large pharma, but even for a small company, we really want to collaborate with universities, with researchers, and I think there's a lot of mutual value where it ends up being kind of the challenge for us is, there are a lot of groups out there, and there's, we don't have the bandwidth to like figure out all the collaboration details. So it's really cool to have basically a structure where companies can very easily build out collaborations with groups without having to put a whole bunch of bespoke paperwork in place, legal docs every time you want to do a collaboration. So one of the things that we do, for example, is we're basically spending a lot of money, collecting tumors and then generating pretty expensive spatial RNA, like whole transcriptome. So it can cost tens of thousands of dollars to just for a single slide to generate some of the data that we're generating. And it's really important to train models. We often are actually buying the tumor samples as well. So we have a number of collaborations with universities where we're very happy to share the data if we can get access to the tumor samples, and we can basically do that trade. And the samples we buy, we don't usually have access to outcomes, so they're also not the most interesting samples. So it's pretty easy for us to generate tons of really expensive data, share it back with the investigators, and then collaborate around the science.
So we're a pretty small group here, and I just thought, does anyone in the audience have a question that they're really wanting to ask? Happy to let anybody interject here. Yeah, please.
I think it's so. We're so glad that you're here and share your expertise. And I'm just wondering, the question of workload, right, is important because right now we have payments that are exceedingly small, so people write grant after grant after grant, have barely time to do their research. So it sounds like, Alana, for you it was like you could pass some of this off, whereas for others, Ron, it was more like you really need to be committed, and that's when you made that decision to step out. I think maybe just sharing that a little bit more with our faculty, what it looked like for you and what you see is reasonable, because some of them may just feel overwhelmed.
Yeah, I think for me, workload was it is still a big concern, but that's where Pivot has been so helpful. Like Jim and his team are really doing a lot of the legwork so that, and we haven't started a company yet, we're kind of working on that, but we're kind of, the university does a lot of work in their offices on all the licenses, all of that is done by them. I don't have to do anything except provide models the way I normally would, which is my obligation as an academic investigator, right? So we provide them through MTA to any academic investigator, and then to pharma companies requires a license, but they handle all of that. So I think the next step in making this more broadly available would involve maybe a little more investment of time, but because of all the work that they've done, it's not too much. But your situation's different.
Yeah, there are sort of a couple models that people tend to refer to. Like sometimes people refer to like East Coast versus West Coast models, like because and like a lot of the like Boston founders of biotechs, maybe George Church is the most famous, are not actually operating the company, but they are founders of, they found the company. They are, the companies are based on their scientific expertise, and usually at the early stage they're contributing maybe more time, but not full time or even part time in terms of being kind of the scientific advisors. And then on the West Coast, I think there's sort of a little bit, you still have some people contributing that way, but maybe a little bit more folks that are actually jumping in and operating and being involved in the companies full time. I think it's really just about what one as an individual wants to do. I think there are very different, it's a very different experience to be completely involved in the company and managing teams and managing payrolls and fundraising and all these things, versus very much it can be a great experience also founding the company, being heavily involved in the science, and then working on the next scientific breakthroughs to start other companies at the same time. So I think both of those models are very effective and have precedent, and it's really about what people want to do and how they want to spend their time.
Yeah, the way I think about it is if I can do this in a way that's advancing my science the way I normally would, then it's worth it. But doing anything with this a little bit more peripheral, that's something I would leave up to the experts in the company, and I've heard it.
Anyone else have a question? One of the things that this makes me think about your answers is the importance, at least from the venture side, when you're looking at novel sciences, you first look and say, okay, is this real? And are they solving a big enough problem for it to be the problem where you need venture capital and we could get the returns at scale? But the next thing we look at is the team. And we think hard about, is this a team that can execute? Your experience is a little different. I don't know how much you guys spend looking at the teams that you partnered with to bring your science to commercial success. Ron, you studied and went through all those paces. How did you then bring yourself into the network of commercialization and business personnel that you can partner with and build teams around?
Yeah, I don't know if this is going to be the answer you're looking for, but we at Recursion, for what it's worth, we didn't know what we were doing.
Oh, great.
I mean, we very much built from first principles, along the way. I mean, a lot of us were, I was just out of, Chris and I were both just out of the PhD programs at respective universities, and so that led to sort of a company culture that I think was very innovative and very valuable in many ways, because we sort of didn't take for granted, a lot of people would come in with bias from many different experiences and say, oh, you can't do this. There were everything that we did, we sort of realized that if someone would say that was impossible, but things work. But over time, as you start to build, you raise more money, then you bring in more experienced folks that have done it before, and then it's really about learning from those people and sort of building a culture where you integrate kind of first principle thinking with also experience. And it's really kind of, that is the key, is having the sets of people that have seen it before but are also open enough to learn, and learning from each other along the way. And then now founding their way, I can kind of lean back and say, okay, well, now I have some experience having kind of done it for many years of Recursion to lean on.
Yeah. So one of the things Jim tells me a lot is that a lot of you geniuses don't really want to focus on commercialization because you don't trust the business guys like me.
I don't know about that. I don't myself understand the business.
Oh yeah, he doesn't trust me anyway. But how do you get over that when you're trying to evaluate who you're going to partner with that's going to bring your science forward? Is that a key question for you?
It is, because I really am honest when I say I do not know much about this. I mean, I never took a business class or an economics class or any of that. I was all science all the way, and I still am. And so I have to trust people like Jim and the Pivot and their expertise to help make it happen. And that's what's made it attractive. Otherwise I would never even gone down that road, right? Because it's just not what I do.
That makes sense. This is a great plan for you, Jim.
I know. No, what I was going to say is I actually view a lot of our role as to like protect our faculty, because a lot of faculty, if they partner with the wrong people, sometimes get taken advantage of. And I think you can't, and I say this as, a researcher, like I've spent, 20 years trying to understand male infertility, and we're still just as confused as ever, but it's interesting, and hopefully, we'll get there at some point. But this is somebody's life's work, and I think that's something that's really hard for some business people to appreciate. But I do also think there's a phenotype that absolutely appreciates that and is mission driven. And I think our faculty also have to, in the world that we're in, accept the fact that you can do world-class science, help patients, and make a lot of money, and those aren't mutually exclusive. You just have to find the right partners who are going to do that in an ethical way. And I tell our faculty all the time is if you're working with someone on the business side and you're like, this doesn't seem right, give us a call, talk to the folks at our venture fund. They have a huge network that they can sort of vet things with. We're really here to be like a tool and a resource, and our venture fund is one of those tools at faculty's disposal.
Yeah, one of the most reassuring things I heard from Jim was the best thing you can do is just keep doing your science. Just keep pushing things forward, because that is innovation, right? That's what we do. And just keep doing that and we'll take care of this other stuff. So that for me is the reason I'm in this seat.
Fantastic. I'm going to end on just one last question, which is that burning piece of advice that either of you want to share. What's that one thing you want to make sure everyone leaves here knowing?
Well, I was going to say, one thing that maybe is underappreciated is around commercialization is oftentimes it's not obvious what the commercial path for the particular idea is. It's not like, everything sort of exists in this routine where you're like, oh yeah, the technology is X and I know exactly how to build a company around it. I think more often than not, it's actually not that obvious how to build a company around it. And that doesn't mean that there isn't, something incredibly valuable to build a company around. It often takes time. And so, one of the things that we spent the whole summer, trying to figure out how to really build sort of the recursion business model around, Chris's PhD technology. And it wasn't that, we didn't start the company with just kind of like the idea of a therapeutic. It was, how do we leverage the approach that we took to build, really a machine learning enabled platform that can help us discover a lot of drugs. And that took a lot of work. So I think it's important to appreciate that oftentimes the commercialization path is not obvious, but there's often something there, and it just takes a little bit of work to figure it out. So if you're interested in getting into the space of spitting out ideas or commercializing ideas, don't feel like the technology that you've developed necessarily needs to be an obvious commercialization. There could be something really valuable there that just takes time to figure out.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think for me, my advice would be commercialization is not a dirty word. I think in academics, a lot of times we're sort of thinking about the dark side or something different, but I think about it as we can have three kinds of impact as a basic scientist, right? We can do outstanding basic science that gets published and other people build on, foundational knowledge. We can do translational research, which we normally think of as translation to the clinic, where you can have an impact on patients. But then you can also have an impact by translating sort of to the community and getting your technology out there. That's how I think about commercialization now that I've learned more about it.
Fantastic. Any last question, or I'm going to turn it over to the other panel?
So we should be able to take like a 10-minute break and then start again in 10 minutes at 11:50. So yeah, we'll take a little break and go from there. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.